And we start already with the first question. There is a question on a rather sensitive topic. It is about the EU taxonomy. And this question is for Katharina. So in order to meet the EU climate and energy targets for 2030 and reach the objectives of the European Green Deal, it is important to direct investments towards sustainable projects and activities. And in order to achieve this, we need to have a common language, a common definition of what is sustainable. And this is why the European Commission has developed a so-called EU taxonomy. Katharina, could you tell us a bit more about the EU taxonomy? We have a question from Tasnim Mayet from the World Biogas Association that is particularly asking specification on the biogas development.
Yes, thank you, Elena. I propose to take a little step back and see a little bit more why the EU taxonomy was developed and what it really is. So we must put the EU taxonomy in the perspective of investment into projects and companies. Traditionally, these investment decisions were taken purely on economic considerations. Is the project profitable? Yes, no. Today, there is more and more emphasis on environmental and social issues when it comes to investment decisions. The project should still be profitable, but investors are ready to forego a little bit of the margin if the project is also good for the environment and good for society. So many funds have recognized this new demand for more conscious investment, and they have started to propose sustainable funds and green funds over the last decades. I'm sure you have heard of some. But sustainable financing as such is a very young concept. And each fund basically had to make up their own sustainability criteria. So there was no common language and definition of what is a green project and what is not. So some funds then went on to invest in projects with dubious green credentials and did a little bit of greenwashing. Over time, the importance of green topics grew on the policymaking agenda, and it culminated recently in the Green Deal. And it became really clear that a common methodology is needed, and that's where the EU taxonomy comes in. Now, the taxonomy classifies economic activities according to their environmental credentials. What is listed in the taxonomy is environmentally friendly activities. Now, what is probably most interesting is which activities do not make it into the taxonomy, because that means that these activities are not considered green and doing no significant harm, which is the other key criteria of the taxonomy. So as such, the taxonomy is a very important development in sustainable finance and is likely to have a very wide range of impact in Europe and even beyond in guiding investment decisions.
Thank you for that. Indeed, the EU taxonomy made it into the news recently when it was decided to include nuclear energy and gas into the list of activities that is classified as sustainable. So what happened there?
Well, politics happened. First, scientists established clear methodologies and criteria after long debates to classify activities as eligible under the taxonomy. And then real life kicked in. Politicians, in response to practical challenges and pressures from their own countries, exerted pressure towards the European Commission, and we ended up with two activities being identified as green that really do not comply with the taxonomy criteria of doing no significant harm. I think no one challenges the fact that nuclear waste is a huge problem that is going to be a burden for future generations, or that fossil gas is emitting greenhouse gases. But both energy sources have a role to play in the transition of our energy system towards a fully renewable based one. And at the beginning of February, then the European Commission gave in to pressure from the member states and classified fossil gas and nuclear as sustainable under certain circumstances. Many fear that this will discredit the entire taxonomy and that this mislabeling would massively undermine the credibility of the Green Deal, because it might direct billions into technologies that are just bridge technologies, and that this money is not flowing where it is utterly needed. That means the fastest transformation of our energy system into a renewable energy-based one.
Sure. Okay, but okay, thank you very much for this. Let's get back to maybe Tasneem's question that is a bit less controversial and more specific on biogas from biowaste. So how the taxonomy classification of biogas from biowaste might impact the financial support to biogas sector?
Sure. Yes, the taxonomy was good news for the biogas sector. It clearly classifies anaerobic digestion from biowaste from households as a sustainable activity contributing to climate change mitigation, both in the short and the long term. So this activity is not considered transitional. That means investing in this is recognized as not creating any lock-in effects in the midterm, as for instance, gas or nuclear would, meaning the activity is climate friendly even in the long term. Now, the inclusion of this activity in the taxonomy is likely to channel public and private funding into it. All European financing in a large sense, that means financing that is public money leveraged, maybe with the help of a guarantee or a blended financing instrument with a public component, will use the taxonomy and align its investment decisions with it. So I think we see the impact of the taxonomy already in this programming period, where some economic activities have ceased to receive EU support, such as, for instance, the bulk incineration of municipal solid waste, while others become particularly attractive, such as, for instance, as Tasneem was asking, the biogas generation from separately collected biowaste. Now, this is very good news for the municipalities, who are the owners of wastes that's coming from the households, and they are facing very many new obligations to collect this waste separately by the end of 23, and to treat it either via anaerobic digestion with composting or by composting alone. Now, funding for both activities is encouraged by the taxonomy, and so this is good news for the municipalities. How to go about managing biowaste was widely discussed, by the way, in a recent online workshop that was called Meeting the Biowaste Challenge. The recordings are online, and I can also recommend a policy brief on the same topic. So yes, the taxonomy overall is an important novelty in the world of finance, with a large expected impact on the direction of public and private money into investment decisions, and it clearly classifies biogas from biowaste as green investment.
Okay, thank you very much, Katharina, for this comprehensive, let's say, overview of the EU taxonomy and in particular the biogas, and also for pointing out to some resources of the Interreg Europe policy learning platform that can help you to have a flavor of what Interreg Europe projects are doing on this topic already. And now we move forward and we change subjects, still staying under the umbrella of low carbon economy, but focusing more now on transport and in particular e-mobility. We have received a question from the region Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes in France. They have asked the policy learning platform to bring some good successful examples of other authorities in Europe that are looking or that are designing strategies and deploying clean public transport, and in particular e-mobility. Simon, from your knowledge of Interreg Europe projects, what can you tell to the Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes Regional Council?
Okay, well, thank you, Elena, for the question. So public transport and e-mobility are two of the main cross-cutting issues that we see in our mobility projects. So we have several policy briefs and webinar recordings available that outline the lessons learned and also highlight available good practices. On the point of strategy specifically, I'd point out that the introduction of sustainable public transport needs to be part of a much broader transition to a citizen-focused low-carbon economy. Electric public transport needs to be integrated in such a way that it contributes to other territorial aims, including uptake of low carbon energy, reduction of carbon emissions, of course, improving social inclusion and supporting the local economy. So public transport needs to be part of a broader mobility strategy, which itself cannot be separated from issues like energy policy, regional development, and land use planning. So you need to ensure cross-departmental cooperation to check you're all moving in the same direction. The transition to electrified transport must go hand in hand with renewable energy development. If the electricity being used is not sustainable, then neither is the vehicle itself. And while you can replace existing vehicles with electric alternatives, the highest impact will also be with a transition to more citizen-focused planning, considering also convenience, multimodality, removing space for private vehicles, and returning it to the public. So it's part of a full transformative strategy. And without these other changes, the impact of clean public transport alone will be muted. So one good example we've seen is from Pamplona, for example, which has a whole smart city strategy, integrating mobility and energy amongst other sectors. It considers electrification of different transport modes, from e-buses to small-scale mobility like scooters, with corresponding regulations on their use and transformation of public space through pedestrianization and also through cycle lanes. They're then also integrating new renewable energy capacity and implementing pilots on vehicle-to-grid technologies, so a real system change with public transport as one angle of it. On a smaller scale, there's also the town of Pax in Hungary, which has faced a significant increase in transport as a result of a nuclear power construction project. The town has used the chance to rethink its transport system with a European Local Energy Assistance grant from the European Investment Bank. This has resulted in a new green city strategy with e-buses, bike sharing, local renewable generation, including support for energy communities and also installation of charging infrastructure.
Okay, thank you for this overview. Indeed, I hear you mentioning in both cases actually e-buses. So e-buses, I can imagine, is a subject that can be of interest to many regions or cities across Europe. Can you elaborate a bit more on the role of e-buses in the transition?
Of course. So, I mean, electrification is the main approach for decarbonizing transport, at least for short to mid-distance transport. And in public transport, there are different options, like regional and suburban trains and trams, but buses are the preferred option. They're flexible, they have less infrastructure requirement, they're a smaller investment, and they have less impact on the transport flow as a whole. But still, making use of e-buses is not a drop-in process, but instead a complete system change, requiring a strategic plan with clear targets, cross-departmental coordination, and cooperation with all of the necessary stakeholders and partners. This strategy needs to take a long-term view with small-scale pilots at first and small incremental steps leading to wider rollout, while again considering the entire system, including charging and integration of renewables. So public authorities can set the mid and long-term targets for uptake, but they also need to change their public procurement processes and rules. And indeed, this is currently a requirement. It's mandated under the Clean Vehicles Directive. So procurement rules can give additional points for vehicles that meet the clean vehicle requirements. This helps to balance out the cost competitiveness issue compared to fossil fuel vehicles. Procurement contracts should also include a test phase, as there can obviously be some technical and teething issues with new technologies. And of course, also the contracts would also ideally involve training for staff coming directly from the e-bus supplier. To come back to the charging infrastructure, this is a major consideration. So this can be either done at the depot for overnight charging or en route via opportunity charging. And the choice of which strategy is taken is dependent on a large number of factors, including route distance and space availability, as well as safety at bus depots. The city of Hamburg have done a lot of work on this, studying the two different charging strategies to see which is best for their situation. And they've also worked to adapt their bus depot to make optimal use of space, but also take consideration of safety aspects and fire risks. I would end this point by just saying that for those who are interested in learning more about Ebuses, I would recommend checking out the Ebus project and its open access Ebus readiness indicator tool. So this is open for use by any public or private stakeholder to assess current conditions in the region regarding the introduction of Ebuses. So it looks at indicators like policies, investment, charging infrastructure and energy, business models, maintenance and awareness and education.
Okay, thank you, Simon, for this. We have talked a lot about infrastructure for sure, but there is something that you also mentioned, which is not only in my opinion, but in the opinion of many in the Interreg Europe community, because we have received several questions on it, the aspect of, well, the human aspect of Ebuses, because this is a change, considerable change, not only for the public, but also for those who actually have to work on those. So what sorts of training and adaptation is needed for this?
Well, for citizens, obviously, there's little adaptation needed, but communication about the new buses and their improved sustainability can help to increase their use by emphasizing the environmental benefits. People are getting more and more conscious of their impact and the choices that they make. This is why it's important also to consider not just the purchase of new vehicles, but also to invest in convenience and comfort improvements. I mean, it's okay getting the new buses, but you do need to get people using them and leaving their cars behind. But mainly you need to consider the training of drivers and of maintenance staff. Firstly, adapting to new infrastructure, the charging points, but also other requirements. For example, Ebuses require specific temperature conditioning before use. So that's something that needs to be considered by the staff. As I already mentioned, this can be included as part of the procurement process. Finally, an area where adaptation is clearly needed is amongst policymakers themselves, so they can create the relevant frameworks to enable use. So two examples we've identified for this can be found in guidelines coming from Castilla y León and also from Brescia in Italy. I'm not sure how my pronunciation was there, Elena. But with these guidelines, they're providing information to decision makers at both regional and local levels to inform decisions.